Aloha and welcome to Coffee Without Milk, a podcast presented by Maui Institute for Modern Music and Ebb and Flow Arts. More information about upcoming concerts, events, and educational opportunities can be found at www.ebbandflowarts.org. All right, welcome to the show, Coffee Without Milk. Peter Swansea, Robert Pollock, and our very, very special guest this morning, evening, afternoon, whenever you're listening, watching. We have one of our favorite performers. We've brought him to Maui many times, and he continues not only to impress audiences in Hawaii, but audiences throughout the globe and all 50 states, I'm told. So welcome to the show, Adam. And I want to, Adam, introduce you to a couple of friends that we invite on to help us kick off this show every time. Let's see, the doctor, the professor, and,
hello.
and Loli.
Good to see you, Adam. It's been so long. Yeah, we are delighted to have Adam, who has been to Maui and to Honolulu several times. Yeah, about maybe 5 times or so. Yeah, I believe so. He's one of the regulars of our programming, and he's done so marvelously on every occasion, always playing, often by memory. Oh, memory? That's great. Yes, Lori. And what we try to do, add a little zaniness, at least in the beginning, because otherwise it becomes very, very serious. And also, we want to explain the title of our broadcast. It's called Coffee Without Milk. Coffee without milk. Yes, the reason it is because it came from an article by a very interesting Slovenian philosopher named Slavoj Žižek. Žižek? Right. Žižek, right. And Žižek says that the situation we are in with the stay-at-home and so forth is not unlike a joke from the old film Nanachka. Oh, and it goes like this. I come into the restaurant and order, waiter, could you bring me some coffee without cream, please? Oh, sorry, sir. We don't have any cream, but we do have some milk. Would you prefer coffee without milk? Very good, very good. Good joke, good joke. You'll get a big tip, Very good. Yes, and so that sort of explains it, doesn't it? We have to stay at home, and we have the luxury, Doctor and I, to stay at home, but many don't. And we have to anyway, and it means that there are certain things we probably wouldn't do anyway, but just to have the possibility of doing them is a nice feeling. And now, unfortunately, we don't have that possibility. Exactly, Loli. And so we carry on anyway, don't we? Yes. And our broadcasts have reached Uganda. Oh, wow. Wonderful. Yes, a composer we knew from way back, Justinian Tamasuza, wrote yesterday that he heard of one of our podcasts. Lovely. That's lovely indeed. And,
shout out to him.
Yes, Justinian, how are you? Good. And by the way, Mr. Park here, he's wearing a mask. Yes, Loli. Just to make sure, we're safe. And but Mr. Pollock, don't wear that when you go in to solicit foundations. It could look a little suspicious. Only if he wears a ski mask, Loli. Anyway, let's get on with this, please. Welcome to Adam. Thank you so much for being with us and putting up with this initial zaniness. Goodbye.
My pleasure.
Adam, it's so exciting to have you on the show. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Loli, for that wonderful introduction. Adam, there's so much to cover. You've worked with so many amazing composers in so many incredible venues in so many amazing places, and you've written so much about it. Just give us the short rundown. What are you all about, man? Tell us, catch us up on where you're at.
Well, you know, it's so funny because it does. Well, I'm trying to not have the mindset of things being a before and after, because I was about to refer to my whole career in music as in past tense.
It's done now. Forget about it.
Here's what it was, and here's what it is.
And now I'm in my bedroom alone
Totally.
all the time.
It is exactly. But this is the, you know, I was raised on classical music, and I went to school for piano performance at Indiana University. At the time, it was just called Indiana University School of Music. Now it's called Jacobs School after they received a huge donation. But anyway, so that's where I was trained. And it was really in classical music. I mean, of course, I was always drawn from probably high school on to modern and contemporary music. I just found it really fascinating and radical, and I found that the decisions that composers of modern music and, you know, contemporary and avant-garde music, I found that their decisions were so I don't know, that they seemed like such powerful decisions, and that because they seem so unusual to me, that there had to have been some conviction in them. That the fact that I didn't understand it is what actually drew me to it. I thought, oh, that's so interesting that they're doing that, and they must really believe in that they put those two notes together that totally don't make sense to me. But
so it didn't offend you right away. At least not right.
I mean,
you were curious. You're like, what is this?
I loved it. I mean, I thought it was really like, I just thought it was radical, and that kind of those kind of strong decisions was something that really resonated with me then. But I also was drawn, of course, my upbringing wasn't classical music, and actually the intensity of classical music, including like, you know, just romantic composers like Rachmaninoff and Chopin, and it was actually really, that was radical to me. I didn't know that classical music could function that way, that it could actually express like extremes of emotions, which at the time I really needed as a vessel. Anyway, so I went to school for music, long story short. And then when I left school, I graduated, I really devoured material when I was in school, and I kind of blazed through everything quite fast. And I ended up graduating early. And it was not the easiest period of time for me. I think I was felt like I was catching up in some respects, and also very defensive about feeling like maybe I'd slipped through the cracks, and that's how I ended up. So there's the whole period was sort of defined by I don't know, sort of a growing stress. And when I left, I knew that I knew that I still loved it, but I also wasn't sure that being in school longer was going to be the answer to creating a life in music, especially like learning how to perform, which weirdly enough, I was getting increasingly like worse at, because I was just becoming more and more of a nervous performer and more paranoid and self-conscious. And so this sort of leads us to how I met Robert and how I began to have a relationship with ebb and flow. Again, sort of long story short, is I developed an idea to do a 50-state tour of American music. And in one respect, this was also sort of a coming out in a way of like, I'm going to now learn this program with no like teacher. Like that was also kind of radical to me, and it felt really unusual. It's like driving with your license for the first time with no adult in the car. So to learn a program, but also if the ambition was to go to all 50 states, I wanted to use it as an opportunity to play modern American music, which I'd really always loved. And it was sort of definitely like a slapdash affair. And I just sent weird proposals out to arts councils in all 50 states, and some of them would respond, you know, well, some of them wouldn't, most wouldn't respond. Some responded really like with hostility, like, this isn't how it's done. How do you think you're gonna ever do this? And it was really, that was interesting. And then, as the fates would have it, that, Hawaii Arts Council, or Council of the Arts, forwarded my information to Robert, because I think that they sensed that we were both kindred weirdos. And they thought, we know just the guy for this. And so it was like a miracle. And
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
It was a huge, I mean, I think they saw that we were definitely kindred spirits, and that the kind of stuff I was doing was perfect for ebb and flow. And but that was like the actual, that tour and that experience was full of what felt like miracles. And one of them was suddenly ending up in Hawaii and feeling really trusted by Robert, and feeling trusted by this organization, who just, what everyone had to do during that tour was take me at my word. Like, I know this is what I'm doing, and you trust that I can play this program, because I had no reputation.
You also sent some samples of your playing.
I said,
that certainly convinced me.
Yes.
After hearing that was a Hindemith.
Yeah, that's true. I had, there was like a concerto. So I sent.
But it was kind of a cold sell, though. I mean, at that point, you're like,
none of the music on my program was on those recordings, but it was. But Robert's right, that that was the CD I was like selling. But to actually get on a plane and head to Maui was like hard to believe, and that's how it started with Robert. And of course, after that, I continued to sort of build a life in music that took me to Texas, and then eventually here to New York City. But throughout it all, Ebb and Flow and Robert continued to sort of trust me with various programs and projects. And
imposed.
Well, and sometimes yes, sometimes the music was totally brand new to me, and then it ends up changing my life. Like, I think of the Arthur Berger piece that we played, the 2-piano piece, and it was so hard. It was like so fiendishly difficult that when I was first chipping into it, I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, and then it ended up being so. I haven't played it since, but I want to. But it's
maybe some post-traumatic stress from that
rehearsal
experience.
I still think of it as like one of the coolest pieces I've ever played, and since then I've really grown to. So I've grown to love that composer. So Robert's been an ambassador for a lot of.
You still have the intention of recording it for us, isn't that right? Or
well, the inventions would be cool to record.
Yeah, the one part inventions.
I'm thinking of when you and I played the
2-piano piece. Yes,
pianos. That was the coolest.
Yeah. The Berger 2-piano. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was in the huge Seabury Hall concert where we did that, and a whole bunch of other pieces. There was the Synergy Festival. But anyway, so with each concert, Robert has sort of kind of set forth of certain things that are in my comfort zone, but then also like we would also be, maybe we could do this, this, and this. And those other things are usually really fascinating, and it kind of sets me off on a whole other kind of tangent. So I love it. Anyway,
that's amazing.
Now, you've just let me know that you've received a new piece from Christian Wolff.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
that is so great.
Is it huge?
It's huge. It's the hugest thing. Well, so Christian Wolff is like really, I mean, such a pioneering, in my opinion, American composer. He was in the, circle of John Cage, Morton Feldman, Earl Brown, and Christian Wolff was the youngest of the pair of the group, and he's responsible for, we always associate John Cage with the I Ching and these chance operations, and it was Christian Wolff who gave him his first copy of the I Ching. It was Christian Wolff, and he also shows up throughout Cage's writing all the time. It's really interesting that Cage, when Christian Wolff was really just a teenager, just brought him right in and just put him right alongside everyone else and just said, and then there's this person named Christian Wolff who's also a great composer. And he just wasn't seeing age and experience. He just saw this person with his ideas. And I think of Wolff's music as being, I don't know, just sort of foresees all these different trends and styles of modern music, like whether it's graphics scores and like, or indeterminate instrumentation, or like really like virtuosic instrumental writing, or something, or even like I kind of tend to associate him with like even a kind of minimalist type of writing, like some of the music. There's a piece I play of his from the 50s, and it's very difficult, very complex, but the whole piece is just one gamut of notes. And it's almost like taking those notes and shaking them up and throwing them out, and then they do a thing, and then you gather them up and you shake them up and you do it again. And it just doesn't, and to me, that sounds to my ear like a very David Lang type thing, of like those kind of bang on a can kind of minimalism, where it's complicated, it's complex, and it's not, it's process driven, but it's, I don't know, it's edgy in a way. And he was doing that in the 50s. Anyway, so I'm a Christian Wolff fan. And
so he taught the classics as well.
And he also, yeah, he taught the classics. He taught like, classics.
And at Dartmouth, did he know Robert Palmer?
You know, I don't think he did, because I think he knew of him, but he didn't really know him. I think I asked, and I probably sent him the CD. It's funny because he, you know, he's a writer, Christian Wolff also, and, you know, of a generation where, I don't even know if this exists anymore, but where composers really are critical of each other in kind of healthy ways, or they're just used to being critical. So I just remember he said something about Palmer where he just said it didn't seem like, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like it didn't seem like a most necessary music, I think is what he said. And I just thought that was funny. And it's interesting because other kind of avant-garde composers who I've shown the My Palmer album to have said similar things. I think Tom Johnson also said something similar, where they just said, it's not really for me. This isn't like my mode of expression, but they appreciated my investment in it. And that's cool. I mean, I think I pride myself on, well, I don't want to say pride myself, but I'm grateful that I tend to really, depending on what I'm doing musically, devote myself fully to that thing. So it might be something totally conceptual, and that's fine, and that's what I'm doing that week, because that's and I love it, and I'll have so much fun with it. And then the next week will be something like Robert Palmer, which is thick with counterpoint and tonal ideas, and it's very idea driven and very emotion driven. And then the next week I'll defend to someone why Cage, you know, might have composed with chance operations that are eliminating his personal preference. So those, I like to kind of live in all those worlds. I've never really wanted to devote myself to one of them.
Well, that was what I loved about the Robert Palmer too, is because it was so not what I expected when I gave it a listen. Knowing, you know, the gamut of work that you have in your repertoire up to this point, I didn't know what to expect, but I listened to it and I thought it was absolutely beautiful and perfectly done, and a nice surprise. It was at that time when I listened to it, I thought, this is really what I want to hear right now. Because
that's nice to hear.
it wasn't, well, so Robert and I talk a lot about, you know, the beauty of these diminished sevenths chords and all these other, you know, sort of textures and densities in music. And the Robert Palmer was so different than what I thought I might be listening to. I recommend everybody give it a listen for that reason.
Do you have any of those queued up, Peter? Any tracks or?
I do, yeah. Do you have one you might recommend? I'm on your YouTube channel, Adam, and everything's here in my name. So.
Okay, well, if it's on YouTube and it's for the Palmer, why don't you play the first prelude?
The Vivace con Grazia?
Yeah, That's short and cute, and I know
Short.
it's on YouTube.
That's good. So I'm just going to switch over to that. We're going to check it out, and we'll just come back in a few minutes. So
Cool.
here we go. So my Italian is terrible, though. I don't know if I just mangled that pronunciation.
No,
but
I'm sure it was fine.
Thank you. All right, here we go. Let's see what we can do. We'll come right back. I have to make sure that I'm sharing my computer sound, and then here we go.
It's looking good.
All right.
Yeah.
Yay.
Man,
Beautifully done.
start dancing. It's
Well, I know it's
complex.
It's so wild. It's so complex.
So the time signatures occur
like mid-measure. I saw too.
So it's sort of what is he doing?
What's the point of that?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't know if it's so necessary. I looked through his letters, and it was interesting to see him corresponding with John Kirkpatrick, who premiered the Ives Concord Sonata and who was a real champion of many American composers, from Copland to Ives, of course, and Carl Ruggles. And anyway,
Carl Ruggles. Nice.
John Kirkpatrick was really he was sort of a muse for a lot of them, and in a weird way, he was almost a kind of composition teacher. He would send back passages and be like, "Oh, work on this." You just don't see that anymore. But anyway, and so speaking of, Palmer would send him samples and snippets and be like, "Oh, I don't know about this," and he didn't come to that decision lightly. He really went back and forth about how to express the phrasing of the right hand to the ostinato of the left hand. And it's interesting because he really could have just phrased it, and he has the phrase markings anyway. So it is a little bit gratuitous, if you ask me, about just putting all these, I don't think of it that way, but it is interesting. I say I don't think of it that way, but when I would try, or when I'd say, well, this isn't just, 4/8 notes, this is actually a 2/4. It is interesting to have the mind shift and think, okay, well, how am I going to play this as if it's not just a phrase, but it's a different thing. And so it's like all composers, when they're presenting a score, they're talking to the performer in some way. And so I saw those meters as him telling me something, saying, well, it's more than a phrase. I want it to really feel like it's this thing that's getting displaced all the time, so I get that.
It does. Yeah.
And that's enough. Yeah. And it's enough to
like
sort of
a
be like,
syncopation
okay, I get
too. And it's neat because that's also part of what gives it momentum, is the fact that the rhythm does feel syncopated and it's broken up into 5s, 7s, and then, even tempered and even metered and stuff too. It really drives it forward and makes it very interesting to listen to.
And thank you. And sort of to the point before is like when the first piece I ever heard of Palmer was called Toccata Ostinata, which is a really exciting, probably one of his more famous pieces. But all these other works, when I would kind of just like order them or dig them out of the Cornell, University archive, they just all seemed so inventive and cool and just beautiful. And this was one such case where I got these preludes and I'm like, what? This sounds so fresh. This sounds like it could have been written, yesterday. It was just, and so that kind of continuum of, I don't know, compositional ideas excited me about Palmer, but it excites me all the time about all these composers whose work I explore and play, because to me it's not like, oh well, that's from the 60s, so that's this museum piece, or even further back. It's like, I think when we kind of crack it open and be like, no, we're all part of this like big continuum, as Cage would say, or like a plane. Like we're all part on the same plane,
Yeah.
and we're more related than we think. And it's not just like, well, that's this guy from Mythica from 1940. It's so
it
limiting
always
to think that way.
seemed me somewhat unreasonable for certain foundations, for example, that do fund modern music, to arbitrarily say they will not accept evidence of performances from an organization of music before 1968.
Oh, that's so funny.
Is that like where they typically would draw the line? Is 1968?
Something like that. And so it doesn't say, that eliminates so much that
Right.
it really
You just have to
it's
tell
quite
them
unfair.
that, hey, the time is meaningless. This whole crisis has taught us that everything is occurring all at the same time, and we can't really keep track of any of it. So.
And in my opinion, it also sort of, it really doesn't do any favors to the audiences to say, well, you can't actually, like, to be punished for limiting the scope of what an audience or listener is going to be exposed to. Because sometimes it really does take that context, or actually being reminded that, interesting things were happening before 1968. I mean, in February, in February, I got 10 pianists together and myself, and we played the Hindemith Ludus Tonalis, which is his set of 25 interludes and fugues with a postlude and a prelude. And Hindemith is a really divisive figure for everybody for some reason to this day, where you either like love him or like really hate him. Or I should say, or nothing in between. But there's some in between people. But he can just be really divisive, and some people will just like not come to a concert if Hindemith is happening. And I thought it was really interesting to sort of be like, I really wanted people who thought they didn't like Hindemith to actually come and be like, no, like submit yourself to this, like surrender to this piece, and watch us all surrender ourselves to it as performers, and just watch this guy do this piece, like watch his piece happen. And it's not about Hindemith, the German composer of this, that, or the other, and tonal fugues, and then just forget it for a second. Just listen to his piece, and then again, it becomes like a radical, powerful experience. And people came away from it being like, "Whoa, like that was great."
How long was it?
It's about an hour. It's not super long. Yeah. It's about an hour. It was really fun.
Where did you perform it?
Yeah, it's great.
Where did that happen?
I did it in the East Village at the school where I teach, called Third Street Music School Sediment. And what was really cool, and then I'll stop talking about it because I could talk about Hindemith all night. Even though two pianos never play at the same time, we set it up. So I really wanted there to be two pianos on the stage, so that performers would be constantly like switching out. So when one person finished, they would leave and someone would take their spot. And so the reason would be that you'd hear like a quick succession between movements, because Hindemith, sort of like Chopin with his preludes, or well, Bach is all chromatic, but with Hindemith, the interludes and the fugues, they all kind of talk to each other tonally. And like, just for example, an interlude will start where the fugue before it ended, and the interlude will modulate to the key of the next fugue. And then that fugue starts where that is and takes you to a different place, and that interlude starts there. So these interludes are like portals. And if you don't have a quick succession between the movements, you don't hear that. Like, and often it's like, it takes one note from one and that note continues to the next. And if we had a bunch of performers and one piano, you'd have like 30 seconds or 40 seconds between movements, and you lose that freshness. Anyway, my point is, even those little details of presenting it made it like, the word for the night seems to be radical, but it made it like a radical experience where suddenly this piece that was supposed to be stodgy and historic and, you know, heavy-handed and pedantic and academic was like not. It was actually really exciting. It was this whole like tonal journey. It was exactly as the title says, it's a play of tones. And people could hear that. And when it was all over, and what's also interesting, I know I said I'd stop talking about it, but the postlude, I don't know if you know this, but the postlude is literally the prelude flipped upside down. And so it's in a retrograde inversion. If you take the first movement and you just flip it upside down, it looks like the last one. He just did note for note, it's the same music. And when you hear the whole thing all the way through and you finally get to that end and you kind of get that that's what's happening, again, it's just super powerful. And my whole point is that Hindemith, like, reputation wise, is not supposed to be that. You know what I mean? He doesn't get that reputation. And all of this is to lead back to like what Robert was saying, is like, that's like, Hindemith does not get you grant money. It just wasn't. And but a shame, because the whole audience that night got to experience this totally wild thing with real living performers.
Well,
like
you're
me.
right. And what's happening is that you created in that performance a metaphor for the transformation of tonal centers for each aspect of it, you know, for each prelude. And as people are changing out on stage and the piece is performed continuously, that action itself is kind of a metaphor for the developments within the piece too, I think.
Right.
And I think the next step would be to get a grant and do it for 24 continuous hours with 144, you know, unique performers.
Of course, yeah. Well, but that actually, I mean, that actually leads me to what, Robert, you were describing about when you did Corona, the piece by Takemitsu called Corona. And it sounds like you had performers linking their performances. Was it by note, or was it?
Yes, but before, let me just say that the hallmark of your work, one of the hallmarks is exemplified by not only the Hindemith, but the Palmer project, because you've been speaking about the Palmer project to me for years.
Yeah.
And it's just this tenacity that you have and this focus.
Obsession.
That, you know, you yielded finally the wherewithal to create a beautifully recorded a CD that really was top notch. Engineered, was it
by Judy Sherman?
Judy Sherman,
who is a legend. But I have to say, it's like, it's nice to hear that, and it's true that it was never like far from my. I always wanted to have that happen, but there was points where, and maybe this is good to talk about during, you know, even this lockdown, when moods and optimism can be up and then it's totally down and up and down. That project, the Palmer project, to me was dead for like a year or two. And I was like, and when people would ask about it, I'd be like, yeah, it was a good idea and it's not happening because I just didn't have funding. And it was just, it's a long story, which I won't get into, but it felt like it was sort of locked in this one label for which I was going to have to provide a lot of money to actually get it produced. And I didn't realize that going in, and I just didn't have the money. And I was like, it's trapped. Like, this album's trapped. And the long story short is that eventually it really was kind of freed without anyone being mad about anything, and it ended up being like in the best home, which was New World Records, which focuses on these kind of composers. Judy Sherman, who, as you mentioned, like she's just amazing. And so it ended up being great, and maybe it was just because I had that pot cooking, but there were certain points when I thought it was totally burned. It was dead. And I would tell people that. I would say, it's great, but it's a shame. So I try to remind myself of those, like anecdotally, during even this period of time where like some days feels great, and then some days it's like can feel
everything's falling apart.
Everything's falling apart. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all wondering kind of what's happening and what's happening next. And
that's the frustration, isn't it? That there's no deadline. We're not told, okay, September 1, everything is going to be okay and we'll be out. No, there's no sense of it. But
it's
a big threat that it will get worse.
Nightmarish. But regarding the corona, I had forgotten entirely until you suggested a dreamlike program that you would do outdoors at Seabury and so on, which would include this. And yes, in fact, early on with Ebb and Flow Arts, we had Bill Anderson come out with a cellist who basically had hired Bill to do a duo recital. They did it in Japan as well, but on the way they stopped in Hawaii, and it was a lovely recital. And we talked about some multimedia projects that were ongoing at the time. And at that point, Yohei Asaoka, the cellist, suggested there's a piece by Takemitsu that's multimedia entitled Corona. And he eventually sent me what must be the image that you have on your video, which we'll soon hear and see, but this kind of series of concentric circles with all sorts of other splashes across it and in different colors.
Yeah, each movement is its own design, even though they're all sort of in a circle, they're all sort of a crown, but each one is its own unique design and its own color. Yeah, each one has its own color.
And Peter, you were involved in this, and what we had gotten seemed to be an instruction about how to play, so to speak, play from the visual cues of this image, which seemed to indicate that each well, this is a vague recollection, but it seemed to indicate that the performers would trace or track one of the concentric circle, one like a ring around, and they would encounter as they went visually portions of the splashes or other aspects crossing into the ring. And so they would play just one note. There it is.
This is an example of one of them.
Yes. And there's just one circle. So my recollection, there were more than
maybe, I think what we did is we took some liberties with it. I think we overlaid, I think several, and I don't remember specifically if it was indicated for a particular instrument or group of instruments, but I do remember we had the liberty to kind of interpret in terms of, density or amplitude. And I think we kind of just arbitrarily chose instruments that we felt like playing. And wasn't there an artist, wasn't Mike involved too, doing live art while we were, wasn't it sort of a recursive sort of a, okay.
There may have been movement though with it.
Oh, cool.
Not sure. But anyway, so one goes around the circle and encounters various things that cross it, and that would then lead to an interpretation of that one single note that each performer played, where a texture might change, a volume, like Peter's saying, maybe the register in any way. Yeah. So we would inflect it as we all went around the circle, and that was our interpretation. But clearly now we know from your performance, and my understanding is that you can't get the score anymore.
Well, so I mean, maybe it is, I think, maybe out of print. But what's
Yes.
funny is I was gonna say, I think were probably, who knows what the, I mean, Takemitsu does sort of provide like a key in a way, but if you notice on I think that you were really actually doing it probably the right way, because I
Oh,
mean, as right as anyone's doing it.
yeah.
For instance, if you look, um, sorry, if you look, you'll see that in the corners at the top,
This is some like a little bit like what we did. Yeah.
yeah, like the dotted lines, he
Yeah.
actually does encourage you to cut and like overlap, because the paper that
Ah.
it's on is actually a little bit translucent. So you can actually layer them.
Oh, it's
And
like a vellum or something.
yeah, and
You know,
so it's
I think
And
so
what's
we
they
the
did
can
score?
video.
What score do you have? Is
me.
yeah.
I have the paper. I have the overlappable score. I'll show you.
What we did,
And so
Robert, is
you'll
we had a video too. We overlaid, and I think the
It was a
performers watched a
video.
video that was
Yeah.
of the score. We animated it somehow.
So you can
Yeah.
see, I don't know if you can see it, but it
Yeah.
really is
Yeah.
sort of like
Uh-huh.
it's kind of see-through, and so
Ah.
you can
And how
overlap them in a way.
did you acquire this from a publisher or how?
No, yeah, I mean, I
Uh,
think what's funny is that I think it's out of print, but you can
yeah.
still buy it. Like there's like
Oh.
there's probably a
Ah.
stack of them somewhere, like
Yeah.
in France or somewhere, and
Yeah.
I just, bought one of them probably, in 5 years, or maybe now
What
everyone's running to get one, but
Yeah.
what led you
Now
to the what
now you let
led
the
you
cat
to
out of
the
the
piece?
bag.
yeah. What led me to it was I was doing a series of concerts at the Broad Museum in LA, and their focus of the series was Jasper Johns, and Jasper
Mm,
Johns was of course, moving and shaking with John Cage and Merce Cunningham in that circle, and the Christian Wolff, Feldman, Brown circle. Jasper Johns, weirdly enough, was really, I say weirdly enough because his art doesn't often get associated with avant-garde. It's like the big American flag or stuff like that, but his circle was very much in the avant-garde, even if his aesthetic doesn't seem to be. And one of the concerts that the Broad wanted to do, they wanted it to focus on Jasper Johns' like interest in Japanese avant-garde art, which he was really interested in for a little while in the 60s, and he spent time in Japan. And during that time, he knew Takemitsu, and Takemitsu at the time also, who didn't compose probably in the style that we might associate with him now, which is, a lot less conceptual and graphic,
yeah, this
but
is
more
one of
like
his
notes on the
few
page. Yeah,
few graphic notation pieces. Yeah.
totally. And in the 60s, I think he was more of like, creating happenings and things like that. And this was an example of that. And so,
Takemitsu was creating happenings, you mean, or Jasper Johns?
yeah, Takemitsu was.
Oh yeah, wow, cool.
And he created one such happening for Jasper Johns. So anyway, I was kind of researching all of that, and then that led me to Corona and another piece from the 60s by Takemitsu, which is actually all written down. But Corona was so, like, I think the fact that it was maybe hard to get, I was like, well, I should just get this thing. It just sounds so weird.
It's
And then I got it, and
it's a work
just
of art.
staggering.
Yeah,
is.
It's beautiful.
He
Yeah.
drew these. This,
I think so.
yeah.
I think so. It doesn't
Yeah.
like attribute anything to
Yeah.
the designer.
Yeah.
What's funny is I guess I scanned them and then I played from, but sorry, I was going to show you. He does have like sorry, he does have explanations. Like he
there's
does
like
say
a guide
what to
for
do.
notation there.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I don't
does
recall
say
seeing that
what-
when we did it.
He does say what the symbols mean from movement to movement,
Okay.
which is pretty fascinating.
And how do you
Anyway.
follow it? Do you go around the circle, so to speak? Or?
Well, what I was going to say to you, so like, yeah, so I do, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is, it's so, sorry. So you could read that.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
and what I did is I went through my score and I marked in what each thing said, like what each thing would do. All that said, and the point of all what I'm trying to get at is you still, when you're doing it, it's like, I think I'm doing it right, but I don't know. And so my point is whatever you are doing is probably just as right as what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know,
But
it's
what
and
ours
sort of
was
what you
just
are
this
waiting.
one. It was just one part, whereas it's in 5 parts. And,
I think so.
And yeah, and
I feel like when we did it, we overlaid all the parts and created an animation. And I
Yeah.
think that we were pretty open about in terms of our interpretation of what it was going to be, but I didn't really see a guide to the notation. I mean, I could
Yeah.
see a performer, I mean, a composer and a performer definitely would develop a relationship with a work like that. You could even recreate it, you know, write it all out horizontally or whatever to your preference, and then just kind of make markings and just create your own arrangement, so to speak, of that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, since I couldn't work with him, and even still, I wrote stuff in, and it's just, you just have to get used to doing your version of the piece, and then eventually that gels into being a thing. But
Yeah,
I would
like your
never tell
style.
someone like, yeah, I would never tell someone like, well, I definitely have the answer.
I'm the
You know?
authority.
is it?
I've read between the
is
lines.
it's entirely inside the piano?
Um,
No.
Not necessarily, but he only has one actual note that he wants that's ever notated, or that he says. I think it's like an F sharp or something. But there's very there's 3 notes that he says you can actually play. Everything else is like pizzicato, gliss. Like it's unclear.
But well, shall we
to
play?
be like, we should see it. Yeah.
Let's play it back. It's a
Are we
wonderful.
gonna see the whole thing?
Yeah.
I don't know if you, what you can do is, if you feel like we've seen
about
enough, just jump back in and
15 minutes, something like.
Well, we can also, you can hear our voices over it. So if there's a moment of narration.
oh yeah, this will be like the
the
DVD bonus features. You could say, hey, here's what I was thinking there. Like, I completely lost my point in the circle at this point.
Yeah, totally. No, it's fun.
All right, let me, I got it queued up. Let's go ahead. So when did you, where is this? What are we checking out here? Where and when?
In a place called Mise en Place, and it's in Brooklyn. And so the story that's interesting, well, press play, and I'll
we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Okay.
It is 13 minutes. These notes are notated. So someone watching this might think 2 things: that everything's written down, and I'm making it up, and it's neither of those things. And that's what I was getting at before. It's like you come up with a map of what is going to happen, and you have to practice that map, but it's still inherently right.
The performer makes a lot of choices, which I think is authentic and honest to music of this period too. I mean, modern avant-garde graphic score.
And I think for each of these like a timer or something. I think I was trying to make sure I was keeping it sort of going to the is making me want to do this piece again.
Yeah.
Notice that's vibrating a long time. So this etude basically is about vibration. So
Are you holding the pedal down with your foot, or do you have some device?
yeah, I have my pedal. I think this one's articulation. Intonation for piano is an interesting idea. It's like, what does that
I suppose
mean?
could you stop it like frets on a guitar? Like could you stop it somewhere? Like could you get like a slide in there? I wonder. You know, like
maybe
a slide piano, like a lap steel piano.
I don't know. It must have something.
Or maybe you're putting pressure on it too, the string.
Yeah. So somehow his instructions and the map made me think that was all definitely what I was supposed to be doing.
Well, and
That
you're right.
reminded me of what
That was
we did with the repeated notes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But
one thing I was going to say funny. This is articulation, so I wanted it to be very notey.
Were you developing themes within that too that you return to?
Kind of, sort of. He says once.
It's like
he sort of outlines speed and legatos and things like that. So.
Wow, look at this.
So there is some vocabulary in there. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
This is the more expressive expression. This was more expressive. An interesting thing I was going to say about this whole video is that I performed this piece only twice. Once was at the Road, and once was here in this performance. And I didn't think that this video existed. And I wrote to this venue like once lockdown started, and I was like, "Do you have this? Like, did anyone ever record it?" And they said they didn't think so. Maybe it was on some server somewhere. And they're like, "We can check, but we're on lockdown." And then they just checked, and it was randomly like in a server that like in some hard drive somewhere, and that's how I got this recording.
Lucky
It
us.
wasn't like professionally made or anything like that. This kind of like was a miracle that it even exists. So this wasn't really meant for public. Kind of cool, but it wasn't like ever intended to see the light of day.
lighting and the sound are fantastic. So it's
nice to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, just like you probably did out there, the other time I did it, we had different lights, colors for each movement. So sort of a really indie place, and this is what we do.
what keeps everything focused on the music.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I was trying to channel Takemitsu's kind of impressionistic Debussy-ish abstract language here.
But in terms of the harmonic colors, those are choices that you're making?
Yeah. Every note's he doesn't have notes, he just sort of has suggestions.
Right.
So the last one is really cryptic in terms of what it's an etude in. Is he calls it an etude in study for conversation.
What did you just put in the piano?
Okay. So I put in a tape recorder.
Oh.
And what it's going to play, and you're not really going to hear the words, but my sister lived in Japan for a year when I was in, I think just when I was getting into high school. She sent us back a tape for interviewing her roommate. Like, this is in, I don't know, 1996 or something. And so I found that. And so this is their conversation. And so I'm doing Takemitsu sort of musical stuff that he's asking me to do, but the conversation is really what's happening on this tape. But she's just talking to him about, I don't even know, stuff. When I did it at the bridge, she came, she was in San Diego, and she drove up to LA, and she was really, she hadn't heard this, 30, 20 years, 25 years.
It's like bringing a piece of you and bringing a piece of your family into this performance too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. It's
totally.
like you're bringing it in.
And it makes something that's very abstract and avant-garde, but to make the same.
Right. Yeah.
Captured all the black notes with the middle pedal so that the strumming, I don't remember what the strumming is, but so that it would sound sort of pentatonic, but like Eastern sound. Kind of cliche, but I thought it might be interesting to have that.
great. That's wonderful.
No, and also, you know, in that last movement, it gives you something to really kind of grab onto both rhythmically and harmonically. And that interesting part about it is the juxtaposition with the recorded conversation, which your brain is trying to decipher both that and what's happening, that, you know, you're trying to relate to all of it at once. And it makes it kind of, I mean, it's all very cool, but that last bit is very immersive in the sense of my brain is trying to engage it on multiple levels.
Did you have trouble hearing the overlaid comments? Did that come through for you, Peter?
I could hear Adam's comments reasonably well. You know, we might miss a few things, but so it goes.
Yeah, it didn't come through that well for me, but what if we might if you don't mind, Adam, we might decide to just play it as is without the overlaid comments, just because they were so muffled.
We could put a link into it also. We could put a link into it.
Would that be?
We can play it back later, Peter, and you can see how it sounds. Because also, like, I turned down my volume just.
Okay, that may have been my problem.
I was kind of ignoring it too.
Anyway, it was all great. But one of the things, one comment is that you, how would we say, so assertive in your effects. There's not one effect that isn't solid sounding and impactful. So often we hear inside piano performances and attempts at same that just leave one sort of wondering what's going on. But with your whether it's that scraping on the, like a glissando scrape that you did with your left hand, is that notated in the it's noted, it's indicated?
I think he says to.
It's wonderful.
Everything that was there, I was like riffing from something saying to do. And so even probably that like strumming at the end of that kind of jing, 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 jing. I have to look back at the score, but there had to have been something that I felt like, okay, well, I can take that and I always want to be able to defend everything, like that I'm not just making it up. So I always try to like have something.
Yeah.
So my score is just marked with all of what he's basically saying to do. And then
it's very, very compelling. And it leads us to these cage videos that you've sent us, which are wonderful, and they're all prepared piano pieces. Sometimes the video gives you an excellent view of the preparations. And again, without exaggerating too much, Adam, you seem to me to be the foremost interpreter of cage at this point, cage piano music. It's just extraordinary, the life you give it. And not only that, we have to say that maybe the common perception of cage is a la 4 minutes 33 seconds, the silence, and then the use of I Ching and the aleatoric and so on. But we forget that the first half of his career, he created these incredible percussion pieces and piano pieces, fully notated, that are rhythmically some of the most exciting music that one could, really
absolutely
listen to.
These I appreciate that, and and it's funny because with his music, I also try to do only exactly what he says, but if he says to do something triple forte, then I'm gonna do it triple forte, like. And it's clear with these early piano pieces that they are so vibrant and that they are requiring such exciting contrast, and that the rhythms are constantly clashing up against each other. And even when it's static, that static, like those repetitions that are very static, are building tension, and that everything is it's just a very like, and I mean it in a good way, actually. It's a very conventionally musical like apparatus that he's building in those prepared piano pieces. And you're right, people to this day are still sort of discovering that, and they're getting surprised by it. And even when they think they know the prepared piano music, they might have heard it in what I sometimes call like the science experiment kind of way of playing, which I don't think does the pieces justice. It doesn't mean you have to be like dramatic, but it's my, like I said before, it's just do what he says. If you do what he says, it's going to actually be incredibly dramatic and powerful piece. It doesn't have to be in this sort of like, you know, new music sterility that we think has to happen, or that we think Cage is about, and it's just not the case in my opinion. And so these pieces for the Broad, in one of the recordings features one called "And the Earth Shall Bear Again," and then another one's called "Our Spring Will Come," and those are both really beautiful titles, but the pieces are so fiery. And both of those were new to me. The Seasons, which is featured on one of them, I had played, and the Suite for Toy Piano I had played, and Perilous Night I had played. But those two are "The Earth Shall Bear Again" and "Our Spring Will Come" were both new to me, and they're both really fiendishly actually to me, just because they're just demanding you're all over the place. Yeah,
we should
fun.
remind some of our listeners who may have been there, but Adam, you did a kind of legendary performance here of the sonatas and interludes entirely from memory. And again, this is typical of your tenacity and your persistence in this, in the pursuit of your art. And it was, we did add some movement. My recollection is that we had some
Oh my
dancers
gosh, you're
with it.
right.
Yeah. And
I totally forgot that. You're so right.
you had done it also in Honolulu that same trip
On Honolulu.
at the
That was fun too.
Arts at Mark's Garage.
Yeah.
And in some ways not unusual here, that the Honolulu audience was much more conservative, and the producers of the concert were much more reluctant somehow, except for the one guy who led it for us, Tim Bostock. He was excellent, but the rest of the staff there and so forth, they were just not as accepting. And in Maui, we had a wonderful audience, my recollection. And
oh yeah, that was such a fun night.
The performance, and there are a lot of people just gathered around when you were preparing the piano and checking it out.
Yeah,
so that was that's available on YouTube, isn't it?
It's on various things. On my SoundCloud, it's on if you just enter even like John Cage download, it's very easy to find. It's also on my website. That's easy.
Yeah, and you've got stuff on Spotify too. I don't know if I saw that on Spotify.
Yeah. It's free on my website too.
Now the ones we're going to hear, are these all readily available as publications?
Yeah, they're all published. Yeah, they are. Peters publishes them all. I'm trying to think if there's any
fabulous
weird deep cuts, but no, I think they're all there. So people can do it at home.
You'd mentioned Jasper Johns. One of them has to do with one of the videos has to do with that, Jasper.
Yeah, so the Seasons and the Perilous Night, I had originally learned for the Jasper Johns series that I developed at the Broad, because Jasper Johns created artworks connected with those titles. Like he has a piece called The Perilous Night, and he has an artwork called The Seasons. He also has art pieces that have toy pianos in them. So the Suite for Toy Piano was featured in this video. Again, like Jasper Johns and Cage, their worlds sort of combined in interesting ways. But what I think is even more interesting is actually that Jasper Johns kind of pulls from Cage's output, and like uses a piece called The Perilous Night. And actually in Jasper Johns's art, that the work that's called the Parallels, like he actually meticulously paints the score, like note for note. There's a page from the score that he paints. So he was pulling from Cage, less so the other way around, but he was pulling from Cage. So, but yeah, I'd be delighted to share these.
Yeah. So which one was the one with? Is it the shorter, the 9-minute, or there's one that's 12?
I've got a part 1 and a part 2. So part 1, I think you're referring to. I'm trying to read the notes to figure it out. We can link these into the show descriptions too.
This is a series of shorter works, but a span of about 9 minutes, and then we can talk about that.
Yeah, that sounds like that sounds nice.
And then we could a little bit later do the other one.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for these. Thank you for these.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure.
You can add some commentary if you want. I don't know if everybody will be able to hear it, but feel free to. All right, let's check it out.
These were all tricky because they all had to be done in one take.
Oh yeah.
So even this right here, this was my room. This was right when lockdown started.
Sneaking outside to record with the toy piano.
Yeah. Thing about this is that this was supposed to be a test run, and it ended up working so well that I just kept going. But my fingers were freezing, and it was raining. But I just kept going. You can hear the sirens.
The sirens are a beautiful touch.
Yeah, at the beginning of this lockdown, at the beginning of this whole ramp up, sirens were pretty much nonstop.
No, it's so New York, playing John Cage on a toy piano outside on a balcony with sirens in March. It's just crazy.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Oh, Land Rover. Okay, hold on, let me get out. There we go.
So
Nice.
now, again, what are the circumstances of these videotapes? They were for a certain project?
Yeah, so this was the Broad Museum wanted to feature their Jasper Johns collection, like doing some sort of remote thing while just to do digital content. So they asked if I would record some music at home playing Cage's music. And so we developed this kind of program of pieces, and I suggested, it's funny because on that there's neither of the pieces I mentioned are there, but
Right,
Our Spring Will Come and The Earth Shall Bear Again. I guess they're in the next one, but I had suggested those and Perilous Night and just some of the obvious Jasper Johns tie-ins. But yeah, I love those pieces.
Yeah, beautifully done. The filming too, the overlay of the Johns paintings, and
I appreciate that. I mean, they did a beautiful job with that. What's funny is that was all done on my, I think it was pretty much done on my iPhone for the actual recording, which is interesting because since then, I have, like a trusty, microphone and little, since this lockdown has progressed, sort of started to acquire objects and skills, which I didn't have. So when we did that to start with, I really had nothing. My piano, I finally got it tuned like 2 days ago. The whole project back then was just really scrappy, but it's exactly what they wanted. They wanted it to be a bit scrappy. So yeah.
More authentic that way, and it's at home. So
preparation is an art in itself. That that you clearly have mastered. That oftentimes, isn't it the case that the preparations are specifications are quite specific, that they ask of you certain 7/8 of an inch from the hammer and
of an
a
inch,
certain
yeah.
16th of an inch, yeah.
Sometimes,
Yes.
yeah, but eighths are there too,
Yeah.
and it gets really specific. I mean, my approach with those, I'll show you. I have a whole toolbox of stuff. I love showing my toolbox. This is my, these are all, some of them are preparations. I also have some other stuff, but I try to like I see what Cage says, the material he asks for, but then I see that as the jumping off point, because I want then to sort of hear the sound that I think is going to work best, and then depending on my piano, what's going to help that to happen, because maybe the material he asked for might be too big for that piano and those strings, and the strings might be screaming for help when you're jamming this thing in there. You just never want that. And,
watch out for that. Yeah, that's not what anybody wants.
Yes.
So totally. And maybe it's going to sound super jangly at 7/16 of an inch, and he doesn't want jangly. So it's always, to me, like a jumping off point, and then it's like, okay, well, then we just want to tweak it to make it, it's like following a recipe or something. Like, it is something to be said for knowing exactly what you need to do, but depending on your oven and your materials or your ingredients, what you have on hand, or the guests you're serving, like different elements actually come into play, and you have to sort of tweak to make it actually work. Because if you approach it with sort of religiosity, it doesn't really do anyone any favors, I don't think. So
you have to be compromising based on what's practical, your environment, and make concessions. It's kind of like reevaluating to be the most authentic to the piece, to perform it with the most integrity. You have to try to recreate the intent of the composer.
The Seabury Hall piano was never the same after sonatas.
Oh, no.
But this is good news, Adam. They apparently have already refurbished that piano.
Oh, wow.
There was a decision at some point whether to totally scrap the piano.
Oh my God.
And there was another one there's another piano that also was in consideration, but my understanding is ultimately they decided to scrap the other piano in the dining hall and rework the piano that you really love. And
I love that piano so
one of my
much.
messages to them when they asked me about it at Seabury was that there are pianists that have played that piano who have passionate feelings about it. It's just,
very passionate feeling. If someone was I remember that. If there's a few pianos that I could actually say I remember it and I know exactly have a firm feeling, and that's like it. I just love that piano so much. I can't explain why, but I just do. And even when you and I did the duos at Seabury Hall years later, just a couple of years ago, the fact that I was sort of reunited with that piano, just like,
Seeing
when
old
you see those
friend.
videos on the internet of lions being reunited with like their trainers like 50 years ago.
Soldiers return
That's like
home
how
to
I
the
felt.
dogs.
I was like, oh my gosh. And I just, even playing, I was like, I remember why. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind of history that breathes out of that piano, and I just love it so much.
Yeah.
There actually probably is, beyond your relationship with the piano, there's probably a lot of history there in terms of how they acquired it and where it came from on the island, because getting a piano to Hawaii is not easy. It's actually really, really difficult. And so there's not a whole lot of them. So one tends to have a long life here with the piano, and there may be
I wonder.
other stories behind it. I mean, we'd have to really check the serial number, and I bet there are. I mean, maybe there's a whole book of short stories about that piano in somebody's head.
I always get the make wrong though, which is funny considering my passion for it. Is it a Baldwin?
It's a Yamaha.
It's a Yamaha, I think.
I was like,
Yamaha,
it's either a Yamaha or a
Yamaha
Volvo.
Conservatory.
Okay.
Conservatory Yamaha.
I always
And
get
it was
wrong.
not. It was not well cared for. They they stored it in that barn basically with very little climate control. And
Yeah,
all the
in the
rest.
studio. Well, they still
Yeah.
don't have climate control in any of those facilities, but I think they are rebuilding that original Performing Arts Center. So they have the
Oh.
Creative Arts Center, that's the new one, and now they're rebuilding and restructuring
Oh,
the
really?
old black box. I think they're just turning it into a whole bunch of dance studios and costume shops, but
Okay.
it lives on.
Wow.
It lives
Yeah.
on.
So, do you know if the season is school going to start again in the fall?
We don't know.
They're saying yes.
Peter's daughter goes to Seabury, so he would know
Yeah.
more.
So they just finished their school year, and congratulations to my daughter who graduated 8th grade. She's in the other room.
Yay.
Congratulations, Ruby. They are planning on resuming in the fall, but at the same time, there's no way to be sure of anything.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of taking a cue from each other, and there's no real leadership about it.
No.
Day by day,
Yeah.
But we're
It's
doing
such a
well
big
in
thing.
Hawaii in general. It's a very low incidence of the infection, and so it seems to be
Well, that's
contained. They say that the heat and the sun helps, but we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've heard the same thing,
Yeah.
not just from the president, who I don't trust anything he says, but then actually, as much as I'll make fun of him saying that, and then like you look around and like read stuff, it's like actually a little bit true. Is that like the summer will kind of help.
It'll get us outside and some sunshine. I think that'll be good.
Yeah, that's important. Before we go on, should we intersperse a few of the cone preludes? What do you say, Adam? Do you have just
Yeah, they're short and sweet.
Should we just start from the top, or how do you recall any in particular?
The first one is nice.
Yes.
I don't know. The first one is super cute, so we could start with that.
Start with the first one, Pete.
Yeah, we got
Yeah.
So luckily, if you for our audiences around the world, ebbandflowarts.org, you can find access to a lot of great music, media, photos, and video that we've collected over the years of performance. And so here we are at the website. Bring your attention to our new podcast webpage as well. You can catch up on the latest episodes of our podcast. So from the recordings, let's see, the 21 Little Preludes recorded by Adam Tendler.
Yeah.
Moderato, should we start there and see what stories we can tell out of that?
Yeah,
all right.
Let's see
if I can make this play.
Sure.
It's like a very playful sort of tango with a nice ostinato and sort of a walking bass line too.
I'm laughing because it's just like so funny to me. Like it's almost like it's really cool, but it's almost like an absurd kind of music.
So what happened here? We had we've had this long-standing Ebb and Flow Arts has a long-standing support from the Edward T. Cohn Foundation that's located in New York. And their grant is generous, has been, and really it's enabled the production of our CDs over the years. Now we have 4, we're working on a 5th. Adam and I have a recording of the music for 2 pianos by George Walker that will be part of it. And so as you know, a tip of the hat to the composer, the late Edward T. Cohn, we asked Adam to record these 21 short little preludes for piano. And he, you know, it's still very, very happy with it.
Oh, I know.
And they, you know, they have these different character and moods, but all very well executed, and also on another good, maybe now the premier piano on Maui, the one at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center.
Yeah, that was a beautiful day.
That's a Steinway concert grand piano. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
you know, performing those at the Makawao Church,
yes,
like actually performing some of
right.
these pieces was such a helpful experience. It was such a helpful experience going into the recording, because I remember we did the performance first.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so cool because, you know, the pieces are a little puzzling to me at first, and they're all, just for anyone listening, they're all written in his hand. So they're, you know, just was sort of like, what is this? Like,
oh, I transcribed it. I mean, I transcribed a couple of those, and it was very labor intensive. And I know, Robert, you have too.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with his handwriting, and it's easy to read in a sense, but sometimes you wonder, well, did he mean that? And you try to decipher the authenticity of his work.
But to hear audiences actually like laugh and chuckle at different pieces, it actually helped kind of give life to my interpretation in a way. I thought, oh, okay, these are actually funny. It was sort of
sometimes,
like hearing jokes that I didn't know were jokes. You know?
In a concert of new music, sometimes people want to grab onto something that's familiar, whether it's rhythmically or harmonically. And so sometimes these little preludes, they think, okay, well, even if it's really hard and really inaccessible and I don't understand it, at least it's only 1.5 minutes long.
Yeah, totally. And it's going to be over quickly. Another fun one, if you go to number 15, is kind of brutal. 15 is fun and
okay, so
scary.
Let's see. I've lost track here. So I'm looking at the play below the title. Okay, so let's check out number 15.
Isn't that 16? Or no, you're right.
No,
probably.
That's why I had to double check. Okay, so here's the number 15, Allegro.
No.
Is it not?
Yeah, this is it.
Is it? Okay.
Let me start it over real quick.
I think it is. Wait, hold on. Let's see.
See, that's why it's hard to tell exactly which one once you lose, because there's so many.
I think it is. It's deceptive. It starts deceptively like coy, and then it becomes completely kooky.
So then it turns around. And as in a previous podcast, Robert, I want to mention this is only 46 seconds long. So it starts out kind of Bach and goes to kind of Bartok.
It's totally crazy. So much happens in 46 seconds.
Yeah.
That's a
well,
lot of fun.
we think, Cohn was a student of Roger Sessions, who asked often that his students write a piece a day.
Right.
And so this might have been the case, that these preludes were knocked out one a day.
and I think they're from that era. Oh, it's so we
Yeah.
started by talking about Christian Wolff.
Right.
Yes.
I think that that's sort of what he was doing with this. So yeah, I never finished that whole story, but I was fascinated by Christian Wolff's music. I was in touch with him just maybe as a fan, and then kind of coyly sort of said, if you want to write a piece, I've like almost next to nothing money, but if you want to thing, I'd be touched. And he said, well, I'm doing like a thing here, and I'm maybe like the piece after the one I'm working on, maybe I will. And I expected maybe like a prelude or something. You know what I mean? I expected something really. I just I didn't know what to expect.
So
But
this is actually written for use.
yeah,
Wow,
and
that's great.
yeah,
Fabulous.
and it's 22 movements long, and
What?
so and it's sort of, and he said, so it's turning it, he told me just before sending it that it was um he was kind of getting inspired by, or just seemed to be sort of in dialogue or conversation with, or resembling sort of the larger sense of like Schumann, like Carnival, and he meant Carnival by name, and which I thought was really interesting because that's sort of where, and the pieces are, it's almost like just taking a tour through his laboratory, because it's like some of them will be really notated and they look just like the cone pieces. Then others will like have arrows and notes floating and it's very graphic. And then the next one's something in between. It's just like kind of just doing a little tour. And I wondered if it was sort of a similar process to what we're describing with cone, where it's like just sort of the practice of writing a thing. But I I do think that he was conceiving it as this larger set. What's interesting about it, and to sort of tie it back to what we're all experiencing, is that in my own lockdown here at home, I'm teaching a bit, and different um, different deadlines like pop up, like the cage stuff. Like suddenly, okay, now I'm playing a lot of cage. Like I have to get this thing done. But in the moments when there's not suddenly this goal, I'm weirdly gravitating back to the stuff that I was raised on, which it has been like Schumann and Chopin. I'm cycling through the ballades like every day. I'm playing the four, and I'm just going back through them every day, just trying to get, because I've never played them and I love them. I've been doing that, and it's interesting to see other people sort of have similar stories where they're like, in whatever format or whatever way, kind of re-examining why they started to even do this, and they're kind of going back into their own histories. And so for me, the fact that I was already, it's just funny because I was already playing a bunch of Schumann when he told me that this thing was starting to resemble Carnival. I was like, that's so weird. I'm like, I've been playing weird that stuff kind of too. So it's just been an interesting process, just even over the last couple of months at this point, which, when this all started, I was naive enough to think it was going to be just a couple of weeks. I thought that we'd be back after Easter, that my school would be back in session. And so I didn't, yeah, it's interesting to watch this all develop, to watch those road videos. Seems like,
well, that was months ago, right? It's 2 months ago. And a lot's happened. A lot's happened.
That's the thing. I mean, it's, in one respect, it's a long time ago because it's probably a little less than 2 months. And at the same time, it's not that long ago. It just seems so long ago.
It just seems, because we're, yes, and in the
time is
era of Corona.
Well, and what it reminds me of is something that you quoted from John Cage, Adam, and I think it had to do with your 88 by 50 tour, is that Cage acknowledged that, or maybe it wasn't Cage who acknowledged it, but as you fly over and pass through all these places very quickly, you're missing that every square foot is worth exploring. So in the same way, it's like our past. When we go back and re-examine something, it's almost an infinite amount of knowledge we still have yet to gain from each thing that's touched us or impressed us at a different point.
Yeah.
it's a very American sort of way of thinking, I guess, if you think about it, with John Cage, with all your American work, with your travels and trips, to explore every square inch, every square foot. Yeah.
But to stay open to also everything that, I mean, it's sort of a symptom of this whole experience, is that it can actually get a little overwhelming because there's so much to explore, and there's so much, even when there's no schedule, to be like, I want to do this today, and I want to do this, and this, and I want to, like, and it can get almost overwhelming because the floodgates are suddenly open, where it's like, well, maybe in the absence of extreme deadlines, suddenly that freedom can be really overwhelming. And so maybe that's part of the safe place, is like, okay, I'm gonna do Schubert.
Something
Everything else is
comfortable.
too crazy.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, take
I don't
comfort
know.
and yeah.
Yeah, just like people are eating comfort foods and watching trashy
Oh,
TV.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
something about just feeling like, okay, like, why did I first start playing this music? And what was it? What was drawing me to it? It is funny that all the weird, like, traditions that have come and gone in my own lockdown, the one thing that stayed consistent is that weird Chopin thing, where every day I'm playing a ballade, come what may. Like, even as busy as things have gotten, I've still managed to play the ballade, one of them, every day. And I don't know what that's about. Like, I can't even fathom playing them for another person. Like, there's no, I would say there's next to no motivation to play them for any people. Like, it's not like something I'm hoping happens. I'm hoping good at it. Like, that's what's interesting about this lockdown, whereas that motivation is sort of taking the place of the tradition, like, I'm going to get this thing so I can share it with others. And in the absence of that opportunity, most of the time, it's like we're faced with, well, what is going to be good for us? Like, what's good for me today? Like, what's good for, I'm going to play this piece of music because it's going to benefit me somehow, not because I'm going to share it necessarily.
But
Which
isn't
can be
that
scary, and sometimes that can be really depressing, but
Yeah.
other days that can be just okay.
Exhilarating. In that same essay about coffee without milk, Zizek talks about advising us to just don't think about the deep, spiritual aspects of our existence, but just do the day-to-day things that give you almost guilty pleasure, just
Yeah.
and so as a modern music pianist, there may be just a tinge of guilt to play Schubert or Chopin, but it's something that gives you pleasure.
Yeah.
And before we play back the other video you sent of Cage, also really wonderful. It's maybe just briefly we could talk about for another half hour. No, for something that just struck me, that first of all, when you play Cage, and it's the prepared piano, so it's really pre the more spiritual or contemplative aspects of Cage, but you play often with a lot of emotion, and in the second half of his career, at least, Cage would kind of eschew that notion of, like,
Right.
one interview he said, we're not interested in this tone A falling in love with this tone B flat, or sort of this emotional context, but yet you bring such emotion. It seems to me to enhance the performances. And the other thing is this: reading over Christian Wolff and his process, and as you say in these new pieces written for you, there's a combination of all sorts of approaches, but there's one piece, I forgot the title now, but it consists of one page, and it goes on for 25 minutes because it's basically, it hands the performer all the choices except maybe the notes on the paper. And wondered if as well as the cage approach of I Ching, that his ego is not involved, that he's leaving it all as a chance. Is this a trap, like cutting through materialist spiritualism, that isn't that even more of an ego to say, no matter what splashed on the page, it's mine and it's going to be great, you know, regardless. Whereas the more traditional composer is abandoning ego for the craft of it and the very specificity of it. What does that strike you as a
I mean,
issue?
I think of cages. I mean, I think of sometimes the things he says. I don't know. Sometimes, just like he says, another quote of his that's kind of provocative and interesting is that, and I'm going to misquote it now, but he used to say something along the lines of, listening to music, playing music, and writing music are all three different things, and none of them are related. And of course, it's intentionally provocative. But
Feldman had that too. He said there are pieces for performers, there are pieces for composers, and there are pieces for listeners.
Yeah,
similar. Yeah.
So I think of him as an actual person, like his person, as also being able to be split into different parts. So the things he sometimes says in interviews, I think of him as like, that might be the provocateur or the marketer, the person who's like the public figure who's saying stuff that is provocative and maybe exaggerated, maybe more exaggerated than even he thinks. Because there's reports of him, for instance, after performances where certain combinations happened and it was so awesome and so beautiful, and he would just love that. And sometimes they would come together that way, and he would actually be like disappointed. He'd say, "Why didn't you do the thing where that?" And people would say, "Well, the operations didn't work out that way," and you could tell he was bummed. So I do sometimes think like the interview cage is sort of like, that's sort of the ringleader who who's twirling the. But then there's also the I also think of sort of Cage as the human who I think struggled with all of this stuff, like who I think used Zen and, you know, Eastern philosophy and religion, because he was actually a very passionate person and a very romantic person, and with very, I think, romantic ideals and very romantic motivations. But I think that those sometimes created a lot of agony for him, like they do for a lot of us. And he was, you know, it's not a popular opinion, or it might not be an opinion shared by the Cage Trust or, you know, other people, but I sometimes think, and what do I know? I didn't know him, that he seemed to wrestle with it, and that the one place that he could kind of channel it was his work, and that seemed to be a place to channel this stuff in a safe way. But then the other kind of third person is him as the craftsman, and so a lot of the pieces I see that are even the most chancy, you see that he actually is still creating what I would like to think of as like a very expressive system.
Yes.
Like, so the system he creates, or like the result of all these things, is still going to create this overall atmosphere that's going to be very him, or the elements of what he's putting together and how he's going to ask you to transform them, or the chance operations that's doing to them, is still, he's still like editing those. So he's still like judging those. And like, there's a famous example of a piece called Apartment House 1776, which he wrote. Yeah, and so it's a super chancy piece because you're basically giving performers all these chances.
Big oratorio.
And it's using like it's using folk music from 1776 America. So someone's going to be doing like Native American songs, and someone's going to be doing. But there's a story of him, like he was also kind of treating hymns through chance operations, just so that certain tones were like subtracted. So it wasn't always just the hymn. It wasn't actual hymn, but you get only parts of it. And he says that all of the systems he was doing at first, he just didn't like how it sounded. And he kept refining that thing until he finally got the chance operation that he liked the sound of. And so I think that that's also really interesting because it just kind of reveals that even at the heart of it, he's still interested in like how it sounds and interested. And so like my expressive playing of it or whatever, I think he's still always really interested in watching human beings like have to contend with the material. So if it's music of changes or these really or etudes australis are really virtuosic but chance determined pieces, he is more interested in a human doing that and figuring out how to do it than like a computer just like spinning it back. I think so that kind of human drama is, I think, a big part of his music. But I totally get what you're saying because it's just a totally different currency than actually, and so like a composer who's actually really devoted to the craft of actually taking what they're feeling and putting it through skills and their skills and putting that on the page through really weighed and measured choices is also completely beautiful and valid and fiendishly difficult. And so it's just like two totally different things to me.
Sometimes it feels like he's pulling our leg a little bit with these pieces. Now, it so happens that in 1976, there was a International Society of Contemporary Music Festival that I attended, and at the large concert hall, the Boston Symphony either premiered this piece, the Renge with Apartment.
Oh yeah.
Or it was one of the first performances.
Oh, cool.
And it was a very typical Cage happening. He wasn't in the audience, my recollection, but it's an oratorio where there are these American archetypes, maybe a dozen on stage in front, and then the orchestra behind them. So the pioneer and the American Indian and the backwoodsman and et cetera. And somewhere midway in the performance, the fellow who was playing the American Indian lost it completely. He started laughing hysterically. And that's why I say it's pulling the leg. It almost felt like he was laughing at the audience for being involved. And then the whole audience began laughing spontaneously. So he, as we say, Cage had this fabulous sense of humor, and it seemed to always come through somehow. But is it true that the genesis of prepared piano was the necessity for an African band sound for Martha Graham?
Yeah, it was for choreographer named Sevilla Ford, who was I believe an African American choreographer, and he wanted to, and so he was going to, at the time he was doing percussion ensemble music, but there was no room for his instruments, and so he did a bunch of trial and error with like tin pans and like stuff, and finally he arrived on the prepared piano. So it was necessity and accident in a way. No, I totally know what you mean. And it's sometimes, again, like when he's also put before an audience, but the works too, but sometimes he also, just some of the stories and the experiences that people had around him can sound like he's just seeing how far he can push it.
Yes.
But yeah.
There was another time he was at a new music festival in Telluride, Colorado, which we attended. and there was a question and answer session, and he was on stage, and someone asked him a question, and he remained silent. It seemed like it must have been at least 5 minutes. Nothing. So it's and again, people started tittering, and then finally just laughing out loud, and the answer ultimately escapes me, but it was just that process of that he had.
Well, yeah, it's when it's at its most, when it's serious, I still also find that his music can force people to be like uncomfortably present. Just like waiting for someone to say something for 5 minutes can be like excruciating. Yeah. His music can be like that, where it's just like, what am I doing here? And what is this? And you suddenly find that you're just like asking yourself the big questions, and you didn't know that that's what you were buying a ticket for. But it's funny because there's so much of him is a paradox. I remember I sat with Michael Tilson Thomas once, and I was getting really I was probably saying all sorts of serious stuff about how to interpret the music, and he said, I always just tell people when they're about to play a piece by John Cage, just the first thing they should do before they play is smile. And I just never forgot that, because it's just like, as serious as Fiendish as the thing is going to be, just smile first and just go do the thing. And I thought that was really nice. On the flip side, the paradox is I was preparing a piece of a program of Quartet for the End of Time by Messiaen, which is, of course, like a massive classic. And then Cage's Concert for Piano and Orchestra, which is a flexible ensemble. So you can just do the same instrumentation for Quartet for the End of Time with Concert for Piano and Orchestra. And so we did that. And I was kind of sort of leading the ensemble about this. And one of the clarinetists said something, because everyone's parts are different, and it's basically everyone's just reading their own solo part, which they kind of have to create for themselves, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if the clarinetist has to gargle or do something really like create, something really. And he said, I think I'm going to lose it. I think I'm going to just like he's like, if I look at my mom, I'm going to laugh and blah, blah, blah. And I had to have this kind of heart to heart with them. And it was sort of the opposite of Thomas's advice. And I said, if they laugh, you really can't. Like, you can't laugh. Like, let them laugh, but you can't. Like, if your mom laughs, don't laugh with her. But then the whole joke is actually spoiled. Like, if it's true. Funny, like, even if it is funny, like, it's not funny if you crack up. Like, so you have to be serious, and like you have to kind of do and so it's sort of the opposite, where it's just like you have to kind of be in the kind of drag of this is the most serious thing, and then in that is sort of the integrity of, and in that you find the integrity. But I had to sort of warn everybody, like, even if this gets funny, try to keep it together, because that's
stay professional.
That's the fabric that keeps this.
That's all we
thing
have.
We're doing.
But,
exactly.
Yes,
that's the glue.
The silence, 4 minutes 33 seconds, is notorious for that kind of thing, where ensembles can't keep it together. Yeah.
But it's also notorious, in my experience, for like bringing out really wild behaviors in the audiences, because the audiences are still, to this day, they feel this need to have to fill it with themselves or with their ego. And so people will do silly things, or they'll like pull out a timer, or
they think it's about them.
Right. And it's so much easier to make it about you than to make it about like nothing, which the piece is about nothing. I mean, its pieces could be about anything, but it's so much scarier to sort of just let it be about nothing than to actually like fill it up and laugh. Like, if you it's a weird kind of segue, but around, I don't know, a couple of years ago, when there was the high school shooting that kind of really I forget even the name of the school, Parkland.
Yes.
But
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Yeah, one of the survivors, she gave a speech, but the speech was actually just silence for the amount of time in which it took for the shootings to happen.
Right.
Which was really powerful.
It was.
But in that silence, if you listen to the audience, they're losing it. Like they're screaming, they're telling her they love her, they're whistling, they're shouting. And it's because the silence is so scary and so uncertain. And it's more than the silence, but it's the presence. Like what she was really forcing on people and what Cage does a lot of the time, not to really conflate the two things, but is that sense of presence, which can be really scary. Even if the piece is really beautiful, it can still feel like this isn't what I signed up for.
Well, I think a lot of people are experiencing that in their daily lives now too. I mean, right now, what's happening in the world is people are having to face themselves in a new way and to face the silence in a new way. They're not able to go to a concert. That is maybe allegorical to the experiences, why people don't understand how to interpret, these times we're in.
Yeah, totally. That's a really beautiful way to think about it. Well,
do you anticipate there will be a period where there are public concerts of chamber music with spatial distancing, masks, and so forth?
I mean, until we kind of return to a normal, normalcy, I hope that people in places, or that places that can do this, will find like innovative and creative ways to make it possible. I might be doing something in the Hudson Valley in June or July where they're going to do exactly that. They're going to have a lottery for the physical audience, and it might be 50 people, and then they're going to stream the rest and ask, for donations.
Lottery.
And I was just like, that sounds great. I was like, if you can do that, I realized like the Met Orchestra maybe can't do that. There's too many moving parts, or like, some places, or in this place that I mentioned is actually kind of open air, which like Seabury Hall, sort of open air. Yeah. And so they kind of can do that. I realize not everyone can, but the places that can do that, I really hope that they will.
Mm-hmm.
I was really heartbroken, speaking of 433, where it was premiered is called the Maverick Concert Hall, which is in Woodstock, New York. And it's an open air theater, and I've played there a couple times. I wasn't even going to play there this season, but I was really hoping they would keep their, because I'm like, I don't even work for you, but I feel like you can. And they can't their summer session.
Oh.
I was just heartbroken because I just thought, I wish you could just figure it out. And so I hope places that can figure it out will. And and if there's a silver lining, the fact that everyone's learning how to stream stuff live and stuff will. I mean, the next time I play in Hawaii, odds are we'll stream it, and my family in Vermont can watch it. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a good point.
It's becoming such a part of the normal thing that from now on, the expectation will be that wherever you are, maybe you can experience, a work that's happening and engage it. So maybe that's okay.
Yeah, even if we can't be in the same place to acoustically receive that information, at least we can experience it live, and we still feel like we're a part of the story when it's happening live, and we're bearing witness to it, even if we're not able to directly physically interact with it.
Right. And you are still sort of, exactly. So
we're doing something.
Yeah.
We're trying.
Let's play the other video, which is about 12 minutes or so, several pieces.
Yeah, in fact, I think
John
Robert
Cage.
will kind of leave everybody with it, because I think it's about time to start wrapping this up. So
yes,
I'll leave it playing, and we'll kind of say our goodbyes and thank yous to Adam, which, if you have links that you want us to post, Adam, you can chat me those or email me those, and we can make things available. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Anything you want to mention to our audiences before we?
I would just say, in my weird little website, if people go to that, usually if there's a little thing that says press, and it's like where reviews are, but it's also where I tend to just post links to the most recent videos and stuff. So if people just go to my website, they can, yeah, oh look. So if you go to menu,
okay. AdamTendler.com, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah,
Menu,
and then
yep.
if you go down to press, I need to figure out a better way to do this. But if you go to press, you'll see the first couple of things. Those are all like
Oh, these are links. Oh, excellent.
yeah, those are like the most recent lockdown things, and then below that. But I need to figure out a better way to do this. And then the rest is just reviews and
some pictures.
there's stuff everywhere, man. But yeah,
I know.
there's a lot of links in there.
No.
Anyway.
I mean, I know you have a lot of great pictures. I just mean like a little picture next to it, just to.
Oh yeah, something
You know, like a menu, like a menu. Oh,
yeah,
I see.
exactly.
You've worked with So Percussion. I've performed with them like 20 years ago in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They're
Oh
really
my God.
wonderful. Yeah,
I love those guys.
they're really. I don't. Is
Yeah.
that a dynamic group? Do they change? I remember there being four
There's
guys.
4 of them.
Like,
I
okay,
think
yeah.
they've had a couple like personnel changes, but I think the original core I think there's only one member that's kind of switched in and out. I think it's pretty much the same core. So anyway, but people can go to the website and explore stuff, but I'm pretty easy to find on every platform, whether it's YouTube or SoundCloud or all the social
Instagram.
medias and stuff.
Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr. You got it all.
all that
Amazon.com.
stuff. Amazon, that's where they can get the books and all that stuff. So yeah, anyway, but
You got a blog. We got to check that out too. So Dissonant States.
I
the
do, but
Tumblr blog.
this is, I haven't touched this for
Never mind.
I haven't.
We'll set the blog aside for now.
No, the thing is, I haven't done that blog I haven't updated the blog in a really long time, just because I didn't agree with something that the platform did, and I just didn't want to post using that platform anymore. So I haven't.
You wanted something more controversial?
No, I mean, I don't want to like make this weird, but they basically, all the users who ever posted their own.
It's okay.
But
It's
at
we
the
can
end
put it in
of
show
the
notes.
show.
Yeah. Anybody who's listened this far deserves it.
Basically, anyone who had posted, it was on Tumblr is the platform, even though it doesn't look like it, but anyone who posted like adult content for themselves, or like that they had collected adult content, all of their blogs were basically taken down at a certain point by Tumblr. That didn't apply to me, but I just politically felt like that was weird kind of censorship, that they were just like suddenly, because some people were really like had beautiful like blogs, and it was like how they expressed themselves, and then suddenly they just like took all their content down, and like and it was a weird kind of, it was actually kind of a chilling reminder that none of us on these platforms own anything.
Right.
At any point they can just take it away.
No,
Yeah.
they say that we're the product, that they're selling us to other people. You know, so.
Totally.
Facebook, according to this book, Anti-Social Media by Siva Vaidhyanathan. Hard to,
Wow.
but how Facebook disconnects us and undermines democracy. Very interesting
nice.
book.
Yeah.
And it's along the lines of what Naomi Klein recently called, instead of the Green New Deal, now this notion that there'll be a Screen New Deal, that
Oh, wow.
basically we'll be able to just stay home, everything done from home, all deliveries. We don't have to leave our houses or homes or apartments, and we'll all be satisfied with the controls imposed by the Screen New Deal. But unfortunately, it's a rather dystopic scenario.
I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I think we'll still get outside. This is what gets you banned on Tumblr these days, Adam.
Exactly. That's the thing. Like people, if they would have their sites taken down, and I was just like, that is really like, that's pretty uncool.
No, it's
So
stepping
yeah.
beyond, I think.
I just didn't want to like add, so my blog, unfortunately, I just need to migrate it somewhere else. I'm just annoyed with Tumblr. But yeah, so anyway, the website's there.
Yeah, it's
but you're right,
way
it is funny because all these sites through which we're all having to function now,
yeah.
you know, they're not public services. They're
they should be.
You know?
They absolutely
Exactly.
should be.
Or maybe they shouldn't. It's hard to say. Maybe we need to
Well,
find
no,
a way
it's
to be
a
less
total
reliant
monopolist. You know, it's power vested in a non-elected, unelected group of often not particularly intelligent individuals who happen to have a lot of money.
You mean, are you talking about Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they made it, you know, they own it. It's not like I deserve,
Yeah, but
I'm not
there
entitled
are
to have a
such
part
things
of it.
as antitrust laws that have been enforced over the years, starting with Theodore Roosevelt and so on, against Standard Oil. And so, yeah, these companies, in my opinion, have to be broken up and made into public utilities like our electricity.
Or dare I say, we just stop using them.
Well, that would be hard now. It's our lifeline now. Imagine if the internet went down, we'd be really
free
lost.
then.
Free.
I want to go back to a flip
Lost or
phone
free.
anyway. You know, I want to
yeah, right.
untether me, let me go. You know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, anyway,
let's wrap it up, gentlemen. Yeah. It's like we're just about to enter a whole new dimension.
A whole other ball game.
Well, let's leave everybody with
yes.
this music of John Cage, recorded for the Broad. Is that Adam?
Yeah, the Broad Museum, and
Yep.
this will be in some order. It'll be the Earth Shall Bear Again. Some pieces from the seasons, Earth Shall Bear Again. Our Spring Will Come, and then I think Spring from the seasons. So
now,
beautiful.
Shall we say our goodbyes now, Peter, or after?
Yeah.
I'm going to say goodbye now, but I'm going to leave this playing. Yeah, but I really love both of them.
Adam,
this is a lot of fun.
Adam, it's wonderful to be with you and see you, and we have been the beneficiaries of your enormous talents over the years. And as you say, the next time in Hawaii, we'll work again. The last recital you did was very challenging for the listeners. And you
I know.
graciously, for me, it was, a prime example of what Ebb and Flow Arts is all about. But you graciously agreed to play certain pieces that we had recommended, and then you brought others. But this sort of synergy between us has really been just thrilling, and it's also typifies, if there's anything that serves our mission, it's been this sort of work that you've provided and these amazing performances. So we thank you again.
Thank you. I feel like all my friends should be so lucky as I have been to have such a partnership as to be working with you. It's like one of my blessings in my life is that I have your trust and your allegiance. So really, it means the world to me, and I'm always looking forward to the next scheme. We've created so many fun. Every concert has had its own like wild ride. So
yes,
and each of your visits to Maui has been like a new chapter in your life too. It seems to me, looking back.
Exactly. And I said that to the audience in this last concert. I said each show sort of has shown where I'm at that time, and
you did
what
say
I'm
that.
doing
That's
musically.
actually where I got it. You're right.
And it's totally true. And what's nice is it gets informed with Robert and his expertise, and he kind of helps also to sort of guide and illuminate all this stuff.
Well,
Material that I didn't know either. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you, Adam. It's really been my pleasure, and we'll leave you all with
so fun. Thank you.
And we'll leave you with some links in our description of the video, and people will be in touch. And we look forward to seeing you in person and live on the stage very soon. Thank you very much.
Can't wait. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.